Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first session, organized within the scope of the first edition of the Open Executive Program on Global Fashion Business here at the Portugal Business School. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first session, organized within the scope. My name is Anna Roncha. I've got a background of almost 20 years working with international fashion and lifestyle brands, with academia and different international organizations. And I've worked with institutions such as the London College of Fashion, the British School of Fashion, ESCP Europe, and Portugal Business School as well. So I'm very proud to introduce our speaker for the day, Abdullah Abo Milhim, who's the Director of Education at Istituto Marangoni in London. And he actually is one of our invited tutors at Portugal Business School for this particular program. So Abdullah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Abdullah Abo Milhim. I'm the Director of Education at Istituto Marangoni, London Fashion School. We are all over the world, and I work in the London School since 2010. I worked in the fashion industry across different places, including London College of Fashion, and also Westminster University and Glasgow Caledonian University as well. And I worked with the industry prior to joining higher education in fashion. I worked in investment banking and also in finance, with pretty much strong focus on luxury brands, wealth management, and private equity, with some focus on fashion industry. And this is where actually I fell in love with the fashion industry and decided to leave finance and commit myself to working in this industry. And it's a pleasure for me joining Anna and Portugal Business School today, and hopefully we can give you some insights on the future of fashion and where we're going with lots of things, including the world post-COVID. And yeah, this is me. So pleasure meeting you all.
Thank you, Abdullah. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about. And I think we can both agree that this is a crucial time for the global fashion industry in terms of coming out of COVID, but also dealing with the major disruptions that we see. So it's really a time where the industry is reimagining its nature and how they do business. So it's quite important to rewire and rethink all of this with quite a strong strategic backbone. And that's why we are having this conversation. So when we think about the different macro influences and, ranging from geopolitics to other events that are happening and shaping the global fashion industry, can you shed some light on that? What do you consider to be the key topics of conversation nowadays?
Fashion evolved a lot in the last few years. So it's an industry where it's always showed some sort of different behavior to a lot of other industries. So I can go back to the financial crisis of 2008, when the world faced what was known back then to be the biggest recession since the war. And that 2008 crisis really completely changed the dynamics of the world that we're living now in terms of asking big questions about globalization. So back then, the fashion industry had a very different behavior to the other sectors, where in the finance sector, we had a decline, in investment banking sector, in financial trades, and the world entered a huge recession. And then we had the luxury sector growing massively during that time. This really gave the impression as if that this is an industry that is working in a completely different dynamics. People were asking questions back then in 2008, 2009, such as, is the fashion industry recession proof? Why is the luxury sector growing in double digits while the world is in a recession? So that was the first sort of idea to open up for discussion. And what we've seen after that is that the financial sector, the business sector, the economy, not necessarily going in the same direction of the fashion industry. And when we say fashion, obviously we need to differentiate. There is the high street, which seems to be very price sensitive and affected a lot by economic factors. But there is also the luxury sector, which until now, people are divided on whether it's a recession proof or not. But what we've seen during that time is that the luxury sector has been, together with the retail sector, has been really affected by economic decisions, number one, political factor, global aspects. The world post 2008 faced some sort of like, big question marks around the future of globalization. And then suddenly we started seeing the consumers giving attention to local factors. Localization became a big and important aspect to this. At the moment where we are, we're recovering from a huge issue that we had in the last 3 years. And it seems to be that the world has sort of like is having some issues with things like supply chain and many other aspects in terms of inflation. I think economics would be a very strong factor to start with when it comes to this discussion, considering that at the moment, the fashion industry is facing conditions that are very different to the conditions that we had pre-2008. So the world since 2008 has been having a massive some sort of like similarity when it comes to economic policies for governments around the world. So it's mostly around very low interest rates, which was pretty much sure across board in all countries. Very similar behavior to central banks, very similar behavior to the changes in inflation in main countries where fashion industry is actually thriving or the big luxury sector is actually there. So economics is actually changing at the moment. We are entering a period of high inflation. We are entering a period of lower interest rates. Luxury fashion industry in general are not used to it. The last time they had this was, many years ago, over 15 years ago. So this is a big change in conditions. And this is not only the fashion industry. I think governments, businesses as well, they need to really go back, look at their business models, look at value chains and say, okay, what can I do in these conditions? So economics would be number one. Political changes, obviously, from taxation to changing governments, regimes, economic policies, fiscal policies, the levels of debt in the economy, and what the government will decide on interest rates or central banks is also a big factor here. And technology, it's always going to be a main driver. So I would say it's multiple factors, but the economic situation at the moment is key to look at.
Right. And it's also affecting, I guess, consumer confidence, right? So we've seen, quite a decrease in terms of expenditure and disposable income to spend in this industry, which obviously affects how brands can progress.
Yes, 100%. So consumer behavior has changed a lot. So consumers saved a lot of money during the COVID period. We've seen various figures that imply, for example, that consumers who shifted to work from home were able to cut on their spending, on going out, on traveling, on things like that. And they use that money to actually either build a massive amount of saving or clear a lot of their debts, pay out their mortgages. And that really created a question mark on whether this money is going to be injected with the economy or not. However, this didn't really materialize properly in terms of increase in spending, because what we've seen straight away after that is a period where the world entered really high inflation, which made consumers really consider their priorities when it comes to gas bills or spending or if their salaries are matching the increase on inflation or not. So that was really a big setback for many companies which were relying on that money, on that purchase power to be actually moving the fashion industry forward. However, we still see different signs on the luxury sector, but as you know, the luxury sector is quite unique in terms of how decisions are actually taken. But generally, there is a lower consumer confidence, as you mentioned, and all over the world at the moment, across board. There are talks about we're heading into recession, and that's really confuses a lot of consumers, drives their consumer confidence even lower. The governments are trying to solve the aspect of inflation, and consumers will look at this attempt as a good attempt. However, this means they're going to be paying higher taxation later on, because this is need to be financed from somewhere. There is another view that is kind of like developing in various places right now, where a lot of economists around the world, for example, started saying maybe the only way to beat inflation is to let the economy run into recession, and then we can rebuild again. But this is very controversial suggestion.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on two things that you've said before, which is obviously, two of the key, I would say the most important, probably the two most important topics that we face in the fashion industry nowadays, which is the sustainability element, but also technology. And technology here, perhaps with quite a holistic overview, because obviously when we talk about digitalization and the impact of technology across the supply chain, we can talk about a variety of aspects. But what do you think has been the most interesting disruption when it comes to technology that we have seen either during COVID or post-COVID?
I think technology has been evolving together with the fashion industry a lot in the last few years. So you mentioned the word disruption, and it's really important to take a pause on that term. Technically, it sounds like it's something not very good. However, disruption also brings a lot of innovation and lots of interesting things. What we've seen in the retail sector in general is that technology coming up with lots of new solutions, lots of new ideas. However, in the fashion industry, we tend to be a little bit late in terms of innovations when it comes to technology. Technology, for example, came up with lots of solutions in other industries where the fashion industry 2-3 years after that started having the sort of like the courage or the decision to actually started endorsing some of these technologies. We can talk about artificial intelligence and all of these things that are usually big topics, but I think at the base of all this, we need to go backwards and say the biggest change that we've seen in the last few years is basically the huge explosion in the amount of data that is produced within the fashion industry. I think we are now at a stage where big data, which is a term that is for many years the availability of data in massive quantities simultaneously that can be collected, stored, and analyzed at the same time. I think that availability of the tools and the systems to allow the fashion industry take something like the big data and ask questions, right? Okay, how can I have better analytics? How can I have better understanding? Looking at the traditional ways of doing things, data comes as the main kind of like layer to start that change, because after data, if you have all this data, then you need to start saying, right, okay, I can use AI and I can use blockchain and I can use all of those other things and analytics. So I think data analytics is the major change that really happened for us in the fashion industry. It really fascinates me how I can see now lots of companies endorsing them with more open-mindedness, because in the beginning there was this view about that we are going to change how fashion works if we're bringing that as well. But we've seen some examples from lots of companies now that data and analytics have been used really in a very different way, as a tool, as a helper, as a different way of doing things, preserving the core of fashion. And now we are really at a very interesting stage when it comes to the fashion industry, where which is going to be for us moving from industry 4.0 to industry 5.0, is that how can we actually combine all these technologies together? So at the moment, we were looking at the effects of analytics, the effects of data, AI, blockchain on supply chain, on authentication of products and different things. But now we are at a stage where, as a fashion industry, we just in the very early stages of this good story of combining technologies and trying to ask big questions. Cognitive computing, for example, is one of the innovations there, where you get the world of analytics with the world of data, with the world of AI coming together to change trend forecasting, to allow the designer to go back many, many years in history and say, okay, 50 years worth of data, colors, palettes, measurements, and how can I use this as a way to look at next year's season, to look at different trends. So we are at a very exciting moment when it comes to the technology, and the metaverse that we're seeing at the moment in terms of being a massive topic is a world that brings all of these technologies together, regardless of whether we believe in the metaverse or not. This is from a technological point of view.
I think it's interesting what you said, because we definitely, and I remember conversations back when we first started talking about automation in the supply chain. And there was a very, generalized, I guess, concern about loss of jobs and how machines were going to replace different roles, but it's a very different mindset. I think what we are now discussing is how it actually helped in terms of efficiency. So when we think about artificial intelligence helping with reducing stocks, reducing waste, definitely it becomes being closer to the preferences of the consumer. That's the key point, isn't it? Is being able to gain to gain efficiency and drive growth.
I absolutely agree, Anna, because in the beginning, there was this whole discussion around sustainability versus technology. And later on, this evolved to become, the contamination of sustainability and technology, the relationship between them. So digital supply chains, smart supply chains, are basically examples where technology and sustainability come together to try to solve, lots of other issues. There is obviously the worries around automation when it comes to technology and robotics and so on in terms of jobs. That's correct. But also we had hundreds of thousands of jobs that are being created from technology. In the short term, there might be some damage for jobs. In the long term, we have new jobs. I give you an example. There is 110% increase. These are official government figures in the UK. 110% increase in the number of jobs in the UK that starts with the word data, for example. And these are all new jobs that emerged in the last 2 or 3 years. So we are at the very early stages of this. And I think, businesses really need to categorize themselves in terms of who are they in terms of technology. Are they the ones who are going to sit down and do the data science and do all the mathematical calculations, or are they going to be the ones who are continue to do what they do, but they just need to bring these technologies to them? They need to train their staff or maybe consult third parties. And not everyone needs to know how to program things, even though it's quite important, because there are people who are specialized in these things. And I think we've seen recently, for example, a huge push from governments around the world to get businesses a little bit more open-minded about endorsing these technologies. Office of Artificial Intelligence in the UK is one of the examples. The digital push that the European Union has been putting in lots of countries as well through different funds and scholarships to increase the number of women working within the sector of technology or IT and underrepresented groups, and get more knowledge from schools level on that as well is also another example. United Nations is using blockchain to monitor the movements of refugees around borders, but also to track the flow of money between different countries when it comes to aid. Government is in Dubai is moving to endorse blockchain across its departments. So we started seeing a little bit of open-mindedness around it. And I think when it comes to a relationship with sustainability, it's going to be a very, very interesting discussion that is going to continue. But that brings us also to other things like, value chain and business models, which I'm sure we probably need to.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually my next question, just because when we talk about this, the influence of technology across other aspects, as you've mentioned, one of the things that I think has been on the agenda for fashion is definitely the sustainability element, and there's a big push across different countries when it comes to legislation, different corporations, different brands endorsing it and making it part of their DNA. How do you see this shift towards new business models, and perhaps not that new anymore, but when we talk about the resale, when we talk about rental, all the fact that a lot of these companies are now bringing these models in-house as opposed to kind of letting it to third parties. How do you see that I guess this mixture between sustainability that is in a way that is leveraged and powered by technology?
I think when it comes to business models, we've seen changes in the world that really pushed businesses to start asking questions about their business models. So if we go back to the definition of the business model, is the way the company creates value. So there's a big comparison between the business model and the strategy. So the strategy, is how you do it. The business model defines who you are in terms of ideology as a company on how to create value. And what we've seen, for example, with COVID is that the biggest disruption of business models of companies that we've seen for many, many years. This is a disruption to their supply chain. This is a disruption to how they want to have a relationship with the consumer. It's the first time they faced a situation where people were working from home or sitting at home and not going to the shops. So that was an example where a lot of businesses said, okay, I need to change the way I operate. So we have different types of businesses here. The bottom line is, if you want to change your organization to endorse a lot of digital, we call it, for example, the digital transformation aspect. If you want to change your organization to do a lot of more sustainable practices, or look at your supply chain, or change even your representation between online and offline, this is definitely a change in business models that brands do on a regular basis. What we're facing newly now is the fact that we have more attention to the business models than before. A lot of big consultancies, organizations have been trying to tell businesses, before you implement any technology, before you implement any big changes, have a pause, understand what your business model is, ask yourself a question: do I actually know where most of my value is coming from? And then see how you're going to change these processes. Because in many cases, the change of business model will also require a change in leadership and management and mindsets and culture of the organization. And it can take for many, many years, and it's different steps as well. It starts with the process of minimum automation. For example, when it comes to technology, you end up at the end with the digital sort of like driven organization. You start with technology being a tool, you end up with technology being a driver of value. So I think business models now needs to be revisited for the world post-COVID. Business models need to be revisited for a world that is kind of like battling with an issue of inflation, a business model that is going to face problems for years to come while trying to solve a problem of supply chain, and new business models around the consumer that you mentioned, the rental and those stuff. And the biggest business model that companies now to really start thinking about is that they have to deal with the consumer that puts services and experience before the product. This is a big change of what we had many years ago, where the consumers had the product becoming key. Now you have a new generation, you have a younger generation that goes to enjoy the experience and not necessarily is going to buy anything. And I believe one of the big business models to start really considering really is that technology played a massive role for the last 20, 30 years. And it made us also believe that e-commerce is going to continue with its growth and stuff. And then we've seen lots of retail closing their physical stores and department stores in the UK and in the US, from Forever 21 or Debenhams in the UK, and so on and so on. But really, when it comes to the future of fashion, the business model we need to start looking at is actually the store, probably the future of fashion, the experience in the store, the technology in the store. And these are the type of discussions we are starting to have now and really asking big questions about.
Yeah, and I think what we have actually had an interesting conversation a few weeks ago about that, how the store is becoming a media, is pretty much, the role of the store is all about a media content, and that's how we create media in the store, how we create content in the store, how we use the store as a channel to communicate, to experience the brand, but not as a conversion point, which obviously impacts on a lot of other issues, such as the KPIs we establish for the physical touch point of our brand as opposed to the digital touch point. So I just want to go to our chat, because if you have any questions, don't forget you can post these on the chat, and we do have one now. So in these new business models, how do you think we can combine an industrial mindset and a creative mindset, which I guess have always, traditionally been two very different ways and languages in the fashion industry?
I think this is really a very good question. And I think, when it comes to the creative mindset, we've seen shifts in the creative mindset in the last few years. So one of the big shifts is, we are getting businesses that usually they are focusing on the creative aspect. Suddenly, they are coming with big questions saying, I really want to know more about business. I want to know more about finance. I want to know more about supply chains, about analytics around data. So I think technology is a gel that brings these two together. But also what's really important is that we are approaching the creative process in a different way. So we are not seeing technology being the enemy anymore. We're seeing technology being a helping hand, a tool, an assisting factor. But also what we've seen as well is that when you change your business model into a combination of when you have people who are very creative and people are very, some sort of like industry driven, I think it's about collaborations. I think bringing these people together uh, around, everything that happens within the value chain from the beginning to the end is one of those things. We started seeing some businesses doing that. I mean, I'll give you an example. Bankers, for example, a lot of them has been joining art courses around the world to know about arts, because they are seeing not only a market there, but because the art sector is becoming a little bit more integrated with finance. So this is an example where two industries started changing things. But also for us, I think, I've been seeing a lot of people from the industry also joining courses or short courses, and sometimes they approach us as university, but I'm sure as many other universities around the world, trying to learn things outside their discipline. So I think there is a big message for academia now and businesses to sort of like, look at business models where, things really combine together when it comes to these mentalities. And I think it's about looking at curriculums, it's about looking at content, and copying that within the organizations, and having in the organizations not only third parties from other companies, but people from within the organization trained and on things which are usually perceived as different disciplines to the people working in these companies.
And I do think, just to add to that as well, and perhaps making almost like a parallel here to the Portuguese ecosystem, that's probably where one of the biggest opportunities for the country lies in. It's this collaboration aspect that you've talked about, is sharing, is making sure that we have both the creative and the industrial side talking and actually collaborating and establishing partnerships and moving forward together, and not as separate sides of the business. So which is something that as you know from both of our experiences, is done quite well in the UK, and there's quite a lot of support systems that promote that collaboration, promote that I guess multidisciplinary conversation that takes place, and it's only I guess it's beneficial for both. It's a win-win situation for sure. So I'd like to just ask you, so I guess we can't avoid talking about the elephant in the room, right? The metaverse. So just curious about how do you see the rise of the this growing attention towards the metaverse? I've seen Gucci selling bags on Roblox for more than the actual physical bag is worth. How do you see this current attention to the metaverse and all its different platforms and all the different assets that come with it?
I think the metaverse is a reflection really of the shifts within the fashion industry in the last few years. So as nature of what it is, it's a combination of all these technologies together in one place. So on one side, we have blockchain, if you want to talk NFTs, but also, we're talking about specific types of blockchains sometimes, whether it's Ethereum or other types of blockchain. But also the metaverse is about VR and AR and mixed realities and marketplaces and so on. So it's a combination of different things. The way I see it at the moment, it's a parallel world, really. I mean, I don't believe this is going to be something that replaces our reality. So there is so much negativity around the metaverse when people perceive it as it's something that is going to replace the realities, because really it's a shelter and it's a refuge, and it's just a parallel universe. Probably not for everyone, but there is an opportunity that is obviously developing there. So what we've been seeing, for example, from different businesses, and obviously COVID escalated that substantially, where people needed some sort of like a refuge from the reality they are living in, where they can go to a world where no one judges them on who they are. They can wear digital clothing that probably be judged on it if they did it in the real world. Sometimes they have so many issues in the real world that they just wanted to go to a place where they have a little bit of freedom and their digital identity become some sort of like more evident. Businesses are trying to capitalize on the digital world. Is the digital world going to continue in its hype? One thing we know is that the development of technologies are going to continue, and it's going to keep evolving that digital world moving forward. There will be marketplaces where there is a huge amount of investments there for businesses. I am against businesses trying to understand exactly what the digital identity of people in the metaverse world is going to be. We can talk about ethical aspects and so on and so on, but each of us has a digital identity, and I think it should be something intimate. It should be something personal. Putting so much effort in knowing what the digital identity of your customers is probably a little bit controversial. However, the digital world is providing opportunities. When it comes to digital assets, now, this is basically a whole different discussions, because on one side, um, there has been a lot of talk about, cryptocurrencies and about blockchain and so on and so on in the last, few years, especially since we started hearing about these things since 2008 or 2009. One thing, I think people need to really understand what they are getting into when it comes to the metaverse. So I see a lot of businesses, for example, wanting to get into the metaverse, but they are not really well informed or well knowledgeable of what blockchain is and how it works. And I think this is a huge risk. NFTs are actually related heavily to blockchain, and a lack of understanding of what blockchain is and how it works. In a market where at the moment, for example, there is so much negativity around the metaverse from those ones who are looking at the decline and the crash in the cryptocurrencies that we're facing. And I think people need to differentiate. Digital assets are related to this. We have digital wallets as well. We have a massive decline in the market at the moment. And this is probably because of various other factors like inflation and so on. But we need to start separating things when we discuss these things. So I want basically people and businesses to discuss the metaverse and putting cryptos aside because it's only one aspect of it. I want businesses to look at the metaverse, but also at the same time, I want them to have a very good understanding of how these technologies work together in the metaverse, because some of these technologies are working in the metaverse in a different way how they work in reality. So this is an area that is continue to evolve and continue to grow. And I think it's the time to have proper education for many people before they get involved in it, because it's hugely costly for businesses. And the ROIs from it are still not very clear, whether they are really ROIs or it's just a hype that is temporarily at the moment. So the long-term strategy of that is key really to look at.
And I guess it's still evolving, isn't it? It's one of those things that, we're still at a very early stage, so it's difficult to see the impact it will have. And I think, what you've said is key. It's not a one fits all in terms of strategy. It's definitely not something that works for all businesses and all brands. And actually, this is an interesting point as well, because speaking about, for example, the use of technology in the physical space, and we've talked about this integration before today. And I was talking to a bigger luxury player last week, and funny enough, the key aspect that they wanted out of that technology, what they really wanted out of it in terms of benefits, was that it would be able to better assist the customer, the sales associate, in order to offer a much more personalized service. So, sometimes we do have this image that, it creates an immersive experience, higher engagement. And yes, it does, but does it convert? Well, not necessarily. So from the business side, that is a very interesting point, is that it's much more functional and operational in terms of what they want out of it. And perhaps they haven't cracked that yet. Yeah.
Anna, this discussion reminds me of also the discussion around the flagship stores.
Yes.
So, for example, when they started emerging for many luxury brands, many years ago, these big flagship stores, people were having the same discussion. So many of these flagship stores not necessarily make so much money for the brands, but they were quite important for emphasizing the brand equity and the brand value and the engagement with the consumers, and that creating that connection or omni-channel with the consumer. And they are massively capital intensive. So I think the metaverse is in the same direction as well. There is a level of engagement, there is a level of connection with the consumer, but not necessarily a place where you might be probably wanting to or having some clarity on whether this is going to have massive ROIs at the moment. But some businesses are actually able to see these ones in the long term. Some of them are able to recognize them in the short term. But what's really key for these organizations or for the fashion industry in general is as we continue to look at the metaverse and as the metaverse keeps on evolving and getting more sophisticated, we also need to go back to the roots and then look at us as an organization and say, okay, if we really want to start doing metaverse stuff, then maybe we need to look at our leadership, our management, our mindset, our culture, and because all of these needs to be aligned together with the idea of going virtual or going digital. If these ones are not ready and the organization goes in that direction, then that misalignment could cause a lot of problems for brands.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, I guess that's why some of the, kind of digital first players were so successful because they were born with that DNA in terms of organizational culture, in terms of leadership, and that obviously makes a huge difference. And actually picking up on that, because you have worked across, different industries before, not just the fashion industry. What are the key differences you notice in terms of leadership and in terms of, the mindset from the fashion industry to other industries?
I think when it comes to the fashion industry, we find leaders now, they have to look at similar things as other leaders. For example, sustainability is key for everyone. We've seen new positions within organizations around the chief sustainability officers and so on. We've seen roles created within leadership team. But I think when it comes to the fashion industry, the big question really is going to be is that leadership requires understanding of other industries, not only the fashion industry. So, when you're working in finance or when you're working in technology, you probably need to learn about other industries, but I've never seen a time for the fashion industry where leaders need to know about everything. So at the moment, leaders within the fashion industry, they need to know about fashion, economics, technology, but also they need to learn about innovations in productions, you need to know innovations in supply chain. And recently they started looking at things like, digital currencies and so on. So I think now the multidisciplinary focus of the leader is quite important within organizations. Apart from the key factors that always be there from project management and so on and so on, but also risk management is becoming really key. Remember, leaders in the fashion industry had to face a lot of issues when it comes to risk. And these risks are not only coming from economic factors, they are also coming from a consumer that's changing every day, from a consumption habits that are changing every day. So how to evolve with a strategy that is probably next year will not be needed, but you need to shift to another strategy. Changing strategies on a regular basis is actually something we've seen a lot in the fashion industries, and this is what's really defining the big leaders. The world of the fashion industry is moving so fast and is becoming so integrated and complicated when it comes to other industries. So leadership, as we know it in general, will not work only for the basis of it, but there are really specific aspects of leadership required in terms of the correlation between different aspects of management or finance and so on. And I think, when you start creating new roles around sustainability within the organization or going green future strategies or United Nations Sustainable Development goals and so on, all of those requires these leaders within the fashion industry to have maybe stronger connections with the government. We've seen, for example, in various countries around the world, governments been releasing new regulations around technology, but also around retail, which has been really affecting fashion. That includes space, architecture, specific regulations. At the moment, for example, the thing about digital currencies, but also the blockchain. So really, it's the multidisciplinary where leaders in the fashion industry needs to focus on. But the change that is going so fast when it comes to risk is really a big key for many of these leaders. Yeah.
I guess it's that agility, isn't it? That it's no longer just in, I think traditionally it would have been perhaps only in the roles or departments that dealt with the consumer directly to follow up the consumer in terms of pace. But definitely now in terms of leadership, it's something that has to be there from the get-go. And that becomes very, that becomes crucial. And I think, my question was kind of aimed at kind of understanding a bit more what opportunities and what can be the impact on the Portuguese ecosystem that all these changes and everything that you've just talked about today and everything that we are seeing happening in a global setting does impact a lot in the global fashion industry, well, the fashion industry in Portugal. As you know, the apparel and textile industry is one of the most important to the Portuguese economy. And Portugal is a world leader for high quality textiles, and it has a very unique positioning because due to the, I guess, the geographic location of the cluster, which is mostly in the north of the country, covering the entire value chain, is able to create this relationship. And it has traditionally been known for flexibility, quick response, all the know-how and innovation that comes with it, and for this, I guess, this symbol of quality and reliability that is also socially and ecologically responsible. So I think it does open up a lot of opportunities. The fact that we are discussing, sustainability concerns, the fact that we are discussing talent, which you've said as well in terms of leadership and how do we approach talent and new roles being created, definitely opens up a variety of different opportunities. And I think within talent, it's interesting what you've said about data and how the number of roles has increased in the UK, because definitely, when it comes to technology talent and IT in particular, and like a high skilled workforce, that's something that we see quite a lot of demand for in the country, which I guess becomes an opportunity for the global setting as well.
Absolutely. What you said about Portugal is absolutely right, because what we've seen also, for example, when it comes to Portugal, we've seen a lot of these businesses in Portugal, they change the way they do business, they change their business model. So when you put that with leadership or with the role of business schools or the role of academia, for example, I think, there should be so much focus on these future leaders within Portugal when they see the fashion industry is evolving, when they see businesses are evolving, when they see the business models are changing, the value chains are changing. I think, the role really is to make sure that those are ready for an industry where they are agents of change when it comes to business models, where they are agents of drivers, which is a little bit, very sophisticated area of leadership. You're talking about transforming a whole organization, either to become a digitally driven organization, or you are transforming an organization to balance the digital and to balance the sustainability and to balance the risk management and the requirements and the compliance with the local regulations, but also keeping the image and keeping that figure, or being consistent with what the fashion industry wants to be. And I think these are the roles that business schools will need to change and need to endorse. And also, there is more potential for that to evolve over time, to include, to start from the things that are changing in the fashion industry, going back and say, okay, how can academia react to that? And I think it's a huge potential there, and probably there is more to come when it comes to this. But I think, Portugal, I was in Portugal in October, as you know, when we met in the fashion week, and I think it was fascinating to see the amount of innovation. So we're talking about future leaders in Portugal that look at innovation when it comes to disruption. For example, in the beginning, a lot of big businesses started facing disruption. And they were like, okay, these small companies are going to be a threat for me. What we've been seeing at the moment is that things have really changed. The big businesses are working with small disruptors. Amazon keeps on buying companies and Google keeps on buying smaller companies. But honestly, the best way to face innovative, the best way to face disruption is to be a disruptive company yourself, regardless of your size, whether you're still the big established company or whether you are the small company. And I think, the future of Portugal in that is, any new ideas, any new changes in the industry, we need to be ready as leaders in terms of innovation. We need also to have solutions for everything, whether it's collaboration or whether it's facing it with changing a business model to be, accommodating for that as well. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting what you've said about this, kind of perhaps sometimes how when bigger companies buy or acquire smaller companies. And one of the things that is actually quite interesting for Portugal is how it's becoming this a new European hub for tech companies. So Porto in particular, I'm not sure if you're aware of that, is also the leader in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Portugal, and also within the in the European context. The territory of Porto actually stands out for having a number of startups per capita that is 20% higher than the European average, which I guess leads to, what you've just said. There's a lot of potential there for, smaller players, bigger players, but players that actually serve the industry. And there are a few, of those that actually serve the industry to be integrated into bigger corporations, to collaborate. And we know that that's how most of these bigger fashion and luxury groups operate anyway, is through acquiring different innovations and different startups at an early stage that they can then kind of bring into their organization. So that's definitely, I guess, another way that the country can evolve, and another potential avenue for growth within this sector is through this push in this kind of, all this.
Absolutely. And I think, Anna, at the end is going to, to become, when you think about Portugal as a country, you have like, there is a heavy focus on digital, there is traditional manufacturing and making of products, there is the sustainability side, and there is also the business side, which is driven by, business schools or companies. And I think when you put all of these together in one pot and, allowing that collaboration between them to happen, I think this can take really the country to the next level in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the things we've noticed the most is there is a genuine will to make this change happen and evolve towards that. And I guess we haven't talked that much about sustainability, but definitely sustainability and a variety of innovations in textiles, innovations in new materials, all these different aspects that impact directly in the product is something that that is quite well known within the country. So I think within this whole innovation ecosystem, there's a lot that can be done, definitely, in terms of joining the dots and making sure that all these players collaborate. But I do believe that there is a strong will behind that. So I'm just my last question to you is really around the this new kind of all these different aspects of the industry and how it has progressed and evolved, and the business models we've discussed. What would you say is the biggest opportunity that is still untapped? The one that hasn't yet, that shows a high potential, but it's still kind of at its infancy stage?
I think when you take the fashion industry at the moment, considering all these changes that we discussed earlier, the biggest change that maybe we could look forward to is how is this fashion industry going to bring aspects of management and aspects of technology together. I think this is where the potential is, because when you think about the businesses that are struggling at the moment, they're either struggling because of inability to understand their consumers or inability to manage our organization within a process of a change, like a downturn, for example, or it could be a success of an organization that is able to bring management into everything they do. And I think the biggest opportunity really for the fashion industry at the moment is to bring management into every aspect. This has always been a situation, there is always focus on creative directors and their role and what they do for organizations. And for historically, they are the biggest names that you sometimes remember the creative directors, sometimes more than you remember the leaders. And I think the biggest opportunity for us is to bring leadership to become a main driver. We have been seeing examples where the creative director is there, but the leadership maybe is misaligning the objectives, or maybe has a completely different attitude towards things that really goes opposite to the DNA of some brands. And I think the opportunity really is to reform the process of management within the fashion industry. We want management that is able to bring creative direction together with technology, together with sustainability, but also at the same time understand the needs of this world. One of the big opportunities that, for businesses now to look at is that consumer is changing, So we're moving from globalization to localization. And then we're going even one level higher. From localization, we're looking at consumption within communities of people. So, that consumption across community is very interesting at the moment. We're moving also from a world where the focus was on product to a world that focuses a lot on experience and service and so on. We're moving from a world that focusing too much on digital, where a lot of consumers are going back to the stores. And I think, put all of that in one context, I would say the future of fashion is a smart retail environment that focuses heavily on the collaboration of the digital and the physical world, where the future of store could be a store that is physically existent, but also at the same time is driven technologically and has all the technologies that we talk about in the metaverse, but maybe within the store. The relationship of the metaverse and the store is not something that we've been hearing much about, but for me, it's a fascination that we probably need to talk about it at some stage, because at some point, these two are going to become close to each other. So we're not there yet, but it's something to look forward to.
Yeah. And I just remembered one last question. Sorry to bring that in there, but this is something that actually we get asked a lot when talking to companies in Portugal, to different brands, from manufacturers to brands. We always get asked about this, the made in Portugal element. Why is it? How can Portugal, in a way, evolve from having, traditionally being a country where, a lot of these international brands, global brands produce? How can you evolve from being a country that also produces local brands, that also produces brands that are internationally recognized? What do you think? And I might have because being Portuguese, although being in and out for the past 20 years, I might have a bit of a biased perspective. So I was just interested in hearing your perspective on that. How is it that how can you reach that stage where you're not just a country where these global brands produce, but you're actually a country that also has brands that are globally recognized?
I think also, the discussion here needs to be, how can I say, starting from who looks at Portuguese fashion, right? So internationally, we have people seeing Portugal as a hub for manufacturing and making and leather and so on, and sustainability and etc., but also digital. And also you have the local consumers. Now, we've seen a shift in Portugal, but also in other countries in the last few years, where, what does the brand logo mean to you as a customer? So we are seeing more and more examples of around the world where, there is still a group of people buying the logo, displaying the logo. They still believe in the logo, which has always been a driver for the success of different brands. But also there is a strong understanding now from the consumers to things like sustainability and so on and so on. And I think companies in Portugal need to be a little bit more courageous to start, developing products, not necessarily being scared about the fact that the logo is not really important, because as long as you establish a strong relationship with the consumer, as long as the consumer knows the origin of things, as long as the consumer knows how this is made, the craftsmanship behind it, the way it's made, I think we have a growing community of people who appreciate this. And there are other businesses looking at this and saying, oh, okay, this is a company I want to do business with. So I think it starts from telling the world that we're actually doing things in a very special way, in a very unique way, preserving the core of Portuguese fashion, but also, not necessarily being driven by a logo that can sell or a name that can sell. We've seen, for example, people in Thailand, when they were going through a process of change, going to the luxury stores, buying items, asking them to put them in a plain bag because of social condemnation. We've seen, in lots of emerging countries where the local fashion in India or in China started buying from Chinese or Indian local fashion when they know exactly how it's made. And I think the potential for Portugal is, with all its history and the name it built, and when it comes, to uniqueness of manufacturing, is to start from there and say to the world, okay, this is Portuguese fashion. We're doing it in this way, and we don't need to put a logo on it. And there will be a lot of consumers who appreciate not only the sustainability side, but also the innovations of manufacturing and also preserving the DNA of, what Portuguese fashion is about.
Yeah, and I think you're right about there's a lot of movement towards buying local, buying within, kind of supporting local brands. And I guess it comes down to storytelling, doesn't it? It comes down to how we tell the message and how we position ourselves. So there's one last question here in the chat that I just like to address before we close. How can we work on improving our brand experience and a strong business model to add value when there is still others like Shein winning the game, only focusing on product, price, but not values?
Interesting question. Well, I mean, those companies are always going to be there, and I think it's about knowing who your consumers are, because you might have existing consumers that really appreciate what you do, but also you might have consumers that they still don't buy from you yet, but only when you start actually building that storytelling that you mentioned earlier. And I think we shouldn't be using those as an examples to come and say, okay, the future of fashion is going to be bleak, because sadly to say, these organizations will always be there, but also at the same time, sadly to say that the developments of technology will make the supply chain and the value chain probably more sustainable. But at the same time, developments of technology will also improve the innovations that fast fashion is also using in selling things that, really quite different to what we want to see there. And I think it's always going to be there. It's about knowledge, it's about experience, and also it's about knowing what's really in your business model. So one aspect of the business model is your supply chain, but also one aspect of your business model is starting from the values of the company itself and starting from your employees and building that strong name. We've seen a lot of organizations moving away from the traditional mission vision on their website to actually tell people this is who we are without needing to put a mission statement or a vision statement there. But, I think, there are quite lots of examples where what we need to see is a process of change that starts from within the company itself. When that mindset is built, then you go publicly and say, look, those organizations will exist, but also at the same time, I'm a different one. This is how we do it internally. Corporate social responsibility is going to become more stronger. Sustainability is evolving into more responsibility. And I think, it's a responsible fashion, not only sustainable fashion anymore, especially now in the world after COVID, where the world responsible is going to become even more stronger. We've seen the biggest amount of loss of jobs within special sectors in the community, but within special gender group. Lots of women lost their jobs during COVID, compromising working from home because of homeschooling and so on. So there are really lots of issues. I think if you bring values built into your value chain, values built in your business model, saying to the customers, saying to the world, saying to your stakeholders that my business model is not only about generating monetary value, it's also about generating value for the society and value for the consumer, and also show importance that value is not only a quantitative value in that sense. And I think this is key to do it, and keep pushing that agenda in terms of the non-monetary aspects of value. And we need to really differentiate here. Brand equity is a focus a lot on the consumer. Brand value is generating value for the consumers, correct, but also is generating value for the shareholders, and also is generating value for employees and management and the public, and generating value in terms of what's the perception of other businesses to our organization. And I think that value needs to be fleshed out even further now. And the more we flesh out the word value, the more we are able to do, things like that question was asking at the moment. Yeah.
and the more competitive we become, which ultimately is the goal. So this webinar that we're having today is, as I mentioned before, serves as the launch event of our Global Fashion Business Program that will launch in October, officially launch in October. It's a total of 60 hours, and the purpose behind this open executive course is about gaining, well, helping businesses acquire knowledge, but also anticipate industry trends, accelerate reinvention and transformation, and it will touch upon a lot of these issues that we've discussed today. So I think we've covered a variety of different topics today that will be further explored and further detailed in this 60-hour course. And also what we have done with the course is try to make it as unique as possible. So we've got a variety of different collaborations established with leading global brands. We've got experts from national and international settings collaborating with us on the different modules. So we're really hoping to help businesses advance and enhance what they already do well, but with a 360 vision. So Abdullah will be one of our invited tutors, and there's a variety of them as well that you can find, different profiles that you can find on the PBS website. So to everyone that was watching, thank you so much. And I hope you found the talk interesting, and have a good rest of the day. And to you, Abdullah, thank you so much for for accepting our invitation,
everyone,
and for the nice chat. And I will see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.